Brandon Sanderson's first secret project, Tress of the Emerald Sea, follows the story of a girl who ends up joining a group of dead runner pirates as she goes to save the love of her life from an evil sorceress. As I was reading, I found 7 life lessons that each of us should apply to our lives. The first lesson is be willing to reconsider your assumptions. Tress joined this group of dead runner pirates, which are the lowest of the low pirates. They are the most hated. They're the ones who broke this unspoken rule of don't kill the people of the ship that you're raiding without giving them a chance to surrender. And so she finds out that this group of dead runners didn't want to be dead runners. They wanted to be pirates, but they didn't want to be dead runner pirates. It should be known that the oceans in Tress's world are not made up of water, but of spores. And these spores react explosively when come in contact with water. Red spores grow explosively into spikes. Blue spores release an explosive amount of air. So the way that the pirates capture ships is they have cannonballs with water inside rigged to explode once it hits the ship. That way the green spores grow into vines and grab the ship. And upon further investigation, finds out that these cannonballs were rigged to not explode, so that the ship would sink and all the members of that crew would die. She finds out that this plot was set up by the captain so that the crew would turn into dead runners and would be forced to be loyal to her, to follow her wherever she goes. She also finds out that Captain Crow deliberately purchased a person who had been cursed by the sorceress. So, putting 2 and 2 together, Tress assumes that the Crow wants to go visit the sorceress. However, rather than acting upon this assumption, she decides to wait until she has more information. How often is it in stories that the hero comes up with this assumption and reacts and takes action, and all of a sudden they're wrong? Sometimes they're right, but all of a sudden they're wrong and the story takes a wrong turn and things go bad. How often do we do that in our own lives? Maybe we have someone who we like. We assume that they like us back, and our hearts get broken because they go off and date someone else because we never asked that person, hey, do you like me? Are you interested in me? We just make that assumption. Or maybe you're at your job and you just assume you're going to be the automatic person who gets the promotion, and so you're frustrated and angry when you don't, when you never asked what needed to be done so you could have it. So this first lesson is critically important because we'd have so much more peace in our lives if we were willing to reconsider our assumptions and work to find more information before we acted. Now, I mentioned that the seas were made up of spores that react explosively with water. What I didn't mention is that these spores could be used as tools. For example, the vines that the green spores create, once they've grown to the max, can actually be used as food. The blue spores that turn into gas, those are what are used to launch cannonballs from the cannons. But because everyone is afraid of the spores because of how they react, not very many people want to use them or touch them because of how dangerous they are. But on each ship, there's one person who's trained to use these spores to fire the cannons, temporarily patch holes in the ship, and etc., depending on what the spore is. This person is called a sprouter. In order to not get thrown off the ship and hopefully use the ship to help her get to the sorceress's island in the Midnight Sea, Tress decided to fill the role of sprouter because the ship that she was on didn't have one. Now, she'd never touched spores before and she was terrified of them, but she was determined in her purpose to go save her love Charlie. So she went to the captain and said that she would be the sprouter, and the captain was like, sure, you're not scared of spores? Are you willing to be around them? Great. Tress went and she practiced every day, and eventually she grew more comfortable with it. And this is where lesson 2 comes in. Danger is like ice water. You get used to it if you take it slowly. Tress practiced with these spores every day, and though all the spores were dangerous, some were more dangerous than the others. And to help her learn what to do, she studied the previous sprouter's notes on how to use spores, and she practiced with them gradually until she became more and more confident in it. This is true in our life. If there's something dangerous or uncomfortable, if we take it slowly and gradually, then it becomes easier over time. We become more comfortable in it, and we become better able to handle and work with those dangers. So you can get used to any environment, but you still need to be careful of what you're in. Is it an environment that will help you grow, or are you like a frog in boiling water? Now, as before mentioned, the sorceress lives in the Midnight Sea. Tress lived in the Emerald Sea with the green spores, and in between those 2 seas was the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea is one of the more dangerous seas. However, Tress wanted to go there because it was on her path to the sorceress. The crew told Tress that they wanted to go to the Red Sea because since it was so dangerous, less ships went that way, and then there was less risk of them accidentally sinking more ships and killing more people. And this is where Captain Crow also wanted to go to the Red Sea, but it wasn't because she wanted to go to the sorceress like Tress thought. It's because there was a dragon that lived in the Red Sea, and he can grant boons. We find out that Crow has a terminal condition where there's spores living inside her body, and the only way that she can be healed is by the dragon. Tress knew that Captain Crow wanted to go to the Red Sea. She also knew that the crew wanted to go to the Red Sea, both for different reasons. And so after a little negotiating, Tress convinces the captain that she can get the crew to want to go to the Red Sea. In exchange, she would help Crow get to the dragon so that she could be healed. This is where lesson 3 comes in. We can choose our actions, but we can't always choose the consequences. You see, what Tress didn't know about the dragon, and what she soon found out, is that the dragon only granted a boon if he was given a slave in trade. So by offering to help Crow get to the Red Sea, she essentially offered herself up unknowingly to become the dragon's slave. This is true in life. You could choose not to work as hard or study as hard, and the consequence could be that you don't get that promotion, or you don't get a good grade. Rather than become angry and frustrated and think that life is unfair, it's important to consider the future consequences of our actions. If I do X, what will be Y? Soon after Tress finds out that she's going to be traded to be a slave to the dragon, she starts considering her life. She's going to be traded for a dragon, she's captive, and worst of all, she's a pirate. Before she had gone to go save Charlie, she had just been a simple window washer who enjoyed making pies and finding a good deal at the market. She could only look back with nostalgia and was thinking about who she had been and how happy she was and just wondering about how life had turned. And this is where we learn the fourth lesson, which is memories aren't alive. Oftentimes when things get hard, we can look at where we're at and say, how did I get here? Why am I here? And you look back on those memories and we tend to forget the hard times. Tress had been poor. She was working because her father couldn't, and she was just doing the best that she could do. And she wondered who she could have been if she hadn't gone off to save Charlie. This is a dangerous line of thinking. Reality is, life is just hard. But it's important during these times that we don't look back and we wonder or wish that things could be different. Because our memories are altered, we don't remember the full reality of what it was. And as Tress continued to look back, she noticed that this was a dangerous line of reasoning. She was far more capable than she had been before. She'd made a lot of friends and truly cared about the crew. And so Tress decided to continue to grow and change so that she could protect the crew from Crow and save Charlie from the sorceress. Shortly after this trip down memory lane, they cross into the Red Sea. The reason why the Red Sea is so dangerous is because it rained unpredictably there, which turned the spores into giant spikes. You see, on the rest of the planet, the rain was super predictable and patterns could be followed for hundreds of years, but not so on the Red Sea. So Tress decided to plan and practice and create ways to protect them from the rains. This is where lesson 5 comes in, which is heroes can be trained. You see, there's generally 2 patterns that heroes follow. Pattern 1 is that the hero envisions likely scenarios, plans, prepares, and trains for them. For example, Tress knew that she would eventually have to confront Kraft and Crow, who couldn't be killed by normal weapons. So Tress devised a gun that rather than try to kill Crow, would instead trap her and render her immobile. And the second pattern is the reason why they risked themselves. As human beings, we have an instinct to try to survive, but the one thing that overcomes that instinct is our relationship with others and our desire to protect them. Heroes don't do it for honor or for glory, they do it for those they care about. So if you want to create a hero, don't give them a battle to fight. Rather, give them someone to fight for. It turned out, however, that all this planning and preparing to stop Crow was in vain because she was taken to the dragon. However, Crow made one mistake when she took Tress to the dragon. She didn't gag Tress. That gave Tress the ability to negotiate with the dragon as well, and instead of Tress becoming the slave, Crow became the slave. She was healed because of the dragon, but Crow was now a slave to the dragon, and Tress was free to go. The crew had grown to love Tress, and they hated Crow, so they didn't bother trying to save Crow, and instead made Tress the captain. And after weeks of worrying and training and working to try to stop Crow, she was tired. And that's what lesson 6 is. Sometimes people get tired. When you're put in stressful situations, you grow and you change and you adapt, but it's tiring, it's hard. And so eventually you burn out. Tress was very smart and she came up with all these different creative ideas to overcome Captain Crow, to keep the crew safe. But after leaving the dragon, she couldn't come up with any ideas of how to overcome the sorcerer's 3 trials. 1 was crossing the Midnight Sea. 2, getting past the militia of metal men that occupied the sorceress's island. And 3 was getting in the tower herself. And as much as she thought and she strategized, she couldn't come up with any plans. And that happens with us too. We burn out, and that's okay. You see, her crew loved her, and they wanted her to succeed, and they wanted to save Charlie, even though they didn't know who he was, simply because they loved Tress. And so they came and they helped her with ideas of how to pass these 3 trials, which in the end were just modifications of ideas that she already had. So if you're in life, if you're tired, you're burnt out, be willing to accept help from others. Finally, with the help of her friends and her crew, she made it to the Midnight Sea and was ready to take on the first of the trials. Except for she didn't want to put her friends in danger. So she took one of the lifeboats and went out by herself into the Midnight Sea and ended up getting captured by the sorceress. She was unable to save herself, and she was unable to save Charlie, her love. And that is lesson 7. Sometimes people need saving. When Tress stuck out by herself on the rowboat, her crew didn't want to leave her, and so they followed behind, and they went and saved her. Maybe you're in a bad relationship. Maybe you're at a job that you hate. Maybe you're depressed. Life is just hard. It's okay to need to be saved. What's very important though is that you have to be worthy of being saved. When Crow was made the slave of the dragon, the crew was relieved because Crow was a very harsh woman who didn't treat her crew with kindness. Tress, on the other hand, was kind to the crew, worked to help them, and wanted to protect them. She loved the crew and the crew loved her. And so they were willing to risk their necks to go save Tress. And those are the 7 lessons from Tress of the Emerald Sea. If you enjoyed this video, it'd really help me if you hit the subscribe button so that I could have more subscribers than Jake from State Farm. And remember, we're not a cult.